Welcome, dear listener, to Candlelight Mysteries, where every whisper hides a truth and every shadow conceals a secret. Tonight's story is The Diary That Miss Marple Was Never Meant to Read, a quiet tale of memory, deceit, and the fragile threads of conscience that bind a village together. In the gentle world of St. Mary Mead, the clink of a teacup and the flutter of a curtain can carry the weight of unspoken crimes. Within this stillness, Miss Marple sits by her window, knitting as the afternoon light fades. She sees what others do not. She hears the tremor in a voice, the pause before a polite reply, when an old diary finds its way into her hands. Written by one who feared discovery, the calm surface of village life begins to ripple once more. What begins as curiosity becomes reflection, and what seems simple reveals itself as human truth in disguise. Chapter 1. Autumn lay softly over St. Mary Mead. The hedges wore a tired green, and the lanes were dry with russet dust. At Ivy Cottage the kettle hummed with unhurried purpose. Miss Marple sat by the window and watched sparrows argue on the garden wall. The post arrived with its usual clatter. Mr. Ellis's bicycle bell sounded once, polite and brief. He folded himself off the saddle and walked to the gate, careful of the roses. Miss Marple met him with a small smile and a hand upon the latch. "Good morning, Mr. Ellis," she said. "Such a fine air for letters." "Morning, Miss Marple," he said. "One parcel and a circular." "The parcel weighs a thought." He placed a brown paper parcel in her hands. The paper had been tied with thin twine and knotted twice. The script on the label was neat, with small capitals and a precise loop on the R of her surname. Mr. Ellis tipped his cap and wheeled away, his bell silent on the return. Inside, the room smelled of beeswax and wool. Miss Marple carried the parcel to her table. She turned it once in her lap before cutting the twine with her sewing scissors. The knot slipped with a tiny sigh. Brown paper fell to the side, revealing a cloth-wrapped book, old and rigid. She unwrapped the cloth and found a diary with a faded blue cover. The edges were rubbed pale. No name appeared on the front. She opened the first page and saw a date in a tidy hand. The year was 30 years past. A sentence followed, hesitant yet tidy, like a schoolchild copying a lesson. A tap sounded at the door. Mrs. Bantry entered without waiting, as friends may do. She removed her gloves with brisk little tugs and tossed them into her hat. "You had a parcel, Jane," Mrs. Bantry said. "I saw Mr. Ellis loitering as if he held news." "Only a diary, Dolly," Miss Marple said. "Old paper has its own news." Mrs. Bantry leaned over the table with fresh curiosity. "Dear me, blue cloth. It could be romantic or very dull. Which shall it be?" "Let us hope for neither," Miss Marple said. "Truth is seldom either." They sat with tea and looked at the first page again. The writing described a village garden, a dance at the hall, and a quarrel in the lane. No names were given. The lines were artful in their secrecy. "I do not like anonymous records," Mrs. Bantry said. "They are the mask and the smile." "Sometimes discretion," Miss Marple said, "is the last courtesy the living can offer the dead." They turned another page. A pressed petal had left a faint stain near the spine. The petal had been blue once, perhaps cornflower. Mrs. Bantry settled back and regarded the window as if the village might answer. "At the hall," she said, "such dances were an excuse for little dramas. People go pale under electric light. They say unwise things near the punch bowl." Miss Marple warmed her hands on her cup. "Yes," she said, "and they forget that walls have memory." A cloud crossed the sun and left the room cooler. Miss Marple closed the book and traced a fingertip along the cover. The blue dye had rubbed away on the lower corner, as if a thumb always found that spot. She rose and fetched a soft pencil. She noted the date of arrival, the condition, and the absence of a sender's name. Mrs. Bantry watched with fond impatience, as one watches a careful baker measure sugar. "Shall we open it properly?" Mrs. Bantry said. "Or must we wait for the vicar to intone a blessing?" "We shall only look," Miss Marple said. "Looking is often enough." They paged forward. A later entry mentioned a Sunday sermon and a whispered conversation behind the vestry. Another spoke of a letter burned before it could be posted. The words were not lurid, yet they carried weight, as if shame lingered in the ink. Mrs. Bantry's laughter sounded bright, and then it thinned. "I know that turn of phrase," she said. "I cannot place it. Someone who loved tidy sentences." "Someone near the hall." Miss Marple did not reply. She studied the margin where the nib had dipped and left a darker tail on the word mercy. She thought of young hands and earnest promises. She thought of the year on the page and the faces that belonged to it. They paused for more tea. Miss Marple cut a sliver of seed cake and handed it across. The clock on the mantel counted the seconds, exact and mild. A cart passed on the lane, and a dog barked and lost interest. A small clue presented itself then. Along the outer edge of the diary, near the foredge, a faint smear of blue wax caught the light. It was not candle wax from common use. It resembled the seal wax once used on letters. A little flake lay loose on the cloth. Miss Marple lifted it with a pin and set it upon a saucer. She said nothing, but her eyes narrowed with thought. "We should invite the Clements for tea," Mrs. Bantry said. "Leonard has a memory for parish nonsense. Griselda will recall the dresses. Tomorrow," Miss Marple said. "It will do. Today, then, I leave you to your mysteries," Mrs. Bantry said. "Promise me you will not be sensible and forget lunch." "I promise to try," Miss Marple said. Mrs. Bantry left a bright trail of perfume behind her. The door clicked, and the house became quiet again. Miss Marple opened the diary at random and read a line. It spoke of an orchard at dusk and the rustle of skirts near the old brick wall. She went to her shelf and took down a directory of the county for that year. She looked up the owners of Gossington Hall. She noted the names, the dates of occupancy, and a change of stewardship after a certain summer. She replaced the book and returned to the diary. Her knitting lay in a bowl beside the chair. She took it up and worked 3 rows in a gentle rhythm. Then she set it down and lifted the diary once more. The paper made a soft crackle, as if relieved to be held by careful fingers. At the back cover, she found 2 loose threads where the cloth had lifted. She eased a card from beneath. It was blank on one side. The other showed the faint ghost of an address, removed with a too firm eraser. The fibres were scuffed but not broken. Miss Marple smiled a little. "Impatient," she said. She rang for Mary, her maid, and asked for the small magnifying glass kept for mending lace. With it, the erased address resolved into the barest hints of letters. A curve like C, a short bar like T, nothing whole enough for certainty. She returned the card and closed the cover. The house had its afternoon hush. The bees worked the last lavender outside the window, steady and indifferent. Near tea's end, Mr. Ellis returned for a signature he had forgotten. His pen scratched where he stood. Miss Marple watched him hold the book while she signed. His left thumb pressed the lower corner, exactly where the die had faded. "You are left-handed, Mr. Ellis," she said. "Since I was a lad," he said. "Father tried to cure me of it. It rarely needs a cure," she said. He smiled and left. Miss Marple looked at the diary's corner again. The fading could have been a left thumb, marking habit over years. She thought of who else in the village favoured the left hand. Habits endure even as faces change. A second small clue emerged as the light waned. On the inside rear board, a shallow impression suggested where a key had once lain, pressed beneath the cloth. The shape was small, narrow at the shaft, old in pattern. Someone had kept a key there and later removed it. She measured the mark with a straight pin and held the measure in mind. The kettle murmured once more. Evening would soon call the lanes to quiet. Miss Marple set the diary on the window table and watched the sparrows again. They kept their quarrels precise and brief, like villagers with long memories. She folded her hands and looked past her garden to the lane that ran down toward the church. Morning brought a pearly light and a slight chill. Miss Marple walked to the gate and noted the dew between paving stones. She went to the vicarage at 11, as one might on any gentle errand. The diary lay wrapped in its cloth within her basket. Griselda Clement opened the door and smiled with domestic triumph. "You are in time for a new lemon sponge," she said. Leonard promised not to eat it straight from the oven." "I am sure he kept his promise," Miss Marple said. "Only by force of will," the vicar said from the hall. "The devil finds work for idle folks." They laughed and moved into the drawing-room. Miss Marple placed the wrapped book upon the table. She let the cloth fall back an inch, no more. "A diary came to me yesterday," she said. "It is old, but its concerns are young." The vicar's eyebrows climbed. "You bring me temptations before luncheon, Miss Marple?" "Only as a caution," she said. "You may recall certain dances at the hall." Griselda tilted her head, amused. "I recall dresses," she said, "and the way a person's truth shows at the hem." Miss Marple opened to a page with a mention of a sermon on mercy. The vicar read and nodded. "That was the summer of the harvest appeal," he said. "I remember the hymn change at short notice. We sang with more vigour than grace." Griselda touched the paper with careful fingers. "Such neat writing," she said. "A woman's hand, I think. Not a girl. Someone trained to write letters." Miss Marple watched Griselda's gaze fix upon a turn of phrase. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "I know this expression," Griselda said. "It belongs to someone with a tidy mind and a habit of copying recipes in ink." "Who in St. Mary Mead copies recipes in ink?" Miss Marple asked, "and keeps them in a tin box with lavender sprigs." "Half the village," Griselda said. "But only one writes needless capitals for flowers and seasons." "And who is that?" Miss Marple asked softly. Griselda paused. "Emily Blount did," she said, before she went up to her cousin's place. She was not cruel. She could be exacting. Miss Marple listened and took no notes. The vicar poured tea and spoke of harvest fairs, raffles and stubborn turnips. The mundane details placed their proper weight upon the year. A small clue slid into view as Miss Marple turned another page. A fragile flower was pressed at the gutter, pale and almost colourless. Its petal edges held a faint glimmer, not of age but of glue applied later. The scent rose barely there and not like old paste. It held a faint citrus tang like modern adhesive. The flower had been moved and reset long after the year of the entry. Someone had altered remembrance. Miss Marple closed the diary and smiled toward the garden. "Do you ever think," she said, "that memory prefers a tidy shelf?" The vicar agreed with solemn cheer. Griselda watched Miss Marple's hands and knew that the conversation had only begun. After luncheon, Miss Marple walked home by the long path past Gossington Hall. The gates were shut, yet the avenue of limes showed its pale leaves like coins. The house waited with that mild patience old houses wear. A rook called from the highest branch and settled. At Ivy Cottage, Miss Marple brewed fresh tea and placed the diary on the side table. Alice Porter knocked lightly and stood within the threshold, hat twisting in her hands. "Please, Miss Marple," Alice said. "I heard there was a book. I should not know anything of it." "But I do. You are kind to tell me," Miss Marple said. "Sit and warm your hands." Alice looked thinner than Miss Marple remembered. She spoke of the summer of the harvest appeal. She spoke of a box put in the earth at the orchard's edge near the old brick wall. "A tin box," Alice said. "Painted green once, but flaked. Mr. Hargreaves told me to mind the kitchen. I looked anyway. I saw only a corner of it before they covered it. I was young and thought secrets would keep. They do not keep." "Who is they?" Miss Marple asked. "I dare not say," Alice said. "I am not brave." "You are braver than you think," Miss Marple said. Alice left in haste, as if speech had burned her lips. Miss Marple watched the lane until it bent behind the hedge. Then she returned to the diary and turned to the final pages. The ink weakened, as if the hand had trembled or the writer had grown tired of their careful discretion. A soft knock sounded again. Inspector Slack stood at the door with his practical gaze and his sturdy boots. He accepted tea without ceremony and looked at the book with mixed suspicion and respect. "You always find the troublesome things first," he said. "I usually find the quiet things," Miss Marple said. "The trouble sits behind them." She told him of Alice's visit, the orchard, and the summer in question. Slack made notes that would withstand daylight. He did not rush. He asked for permission to borrow the diary for a day. She agreed, but kept the cloth and the flake of wax. They spoke of the hall and of Edwardian portraits with eyes that followed one down corridors. They spoke of staff lists and Sunday duties. He rose to go, promising a formal request by evening. He had not left the gate when Miss Marple noticed something new. The torn card at the back showed a watermark in the afternoon light. She held it to the window and read the faint letters in the paper. M and R intertwined, with a tiny crown above them. That mark belonged to Morton and Reed, a London stationer with a reputation for solemn taste. It was used for their personal correspondence cards and special orders. A fourth small clue, therefore, joined the day's shelf. Someone in the village once purchased those cards or received them from London. Such stores did not deliver trifles to every cottage. She thought of those who had cousins in town. She thought of those who had taste and the funds to indulge it. Evening drew in. The sky turned the colour of old pewter. Miss Marple lit a lamp with a calm hand. The diary returned to its cloth. The saucer held the wax flake like a tiny sea. Mary brought in the post. A single envelope lay on the tray, pale and unadorned. The address showed block letters, cautious and too even. There was no return address. Miss Marple studied the crease where the flap had been sealed. A crumb of blue wax clung to the paper, nearly invisible. She opened the envelope and found 3 words on a single slip. "Please leave it." There was no signature. The hand was not the same as the diary's hand. The paper bore no watermark. The scent was faintly of tobacco and starch. She considered the clock in the lane outside. She considered the orchard wall and the year on the diary's first page. A small smile touched her mouth, an expression both kind and alert. She put on a cardigan and went to the gate. The village held its usual evening music. A child called, then grew quiet. A bicycle passed with a whisk of rubber. The church bell announced the half-hour. She locked her gate and returned inside. She placed the envelope in the drawer with the flake of wax and the pin's measure of the key's impression. Order gives courage to the mind. She measured her courage by the careful arrangement of things. The last clue of the day came with the lamplight's angle. On the diary's flyleaf near the binding, a T-ring had once formed and faded. She measured the ring's diameter with a thread and found it larger than her own cups. The vicarage used a set with shallow bowls and wide saucers. This mark belonged to that family of cups. The diary had once sat near the vicar's tea, or near a set of the same design. That did not accuse. It only placed the book within a circle of polite talk. Miss Marple stood at the window and watched as the lamp drew moths in slow spirals. The moths drifted near and away, forever undecided. She rested her fingers on the blue cloth and gave the night a nod, as if it had asked a fair question. She would visit the hall tomorrow. She would ask after old dances and old boxes. She would praise the orchard's pears. She would sit where the light fell true across the library rug. Before bed she wrote a line in her own neat hand. Parcel received. Diary of 30 years past. Smear of blue wax at edge. Card with London watermark. Pressed flower reset with modern adhesive. Impression of key in rear board. Anonymous request to leave it. Likely hand, careful and unpracticed. Orchard wall. She closed her notebook and wound her clock. She drew the curtains with a little pull. She set the diary upon the table where the moon could find it by chance. Then she turned out the lamp and let the cottage hold its breath for sleep. The village eased into darkness with the sense of a curtain lowered between acts. Miss Marple lay beneath her shawl and let the day order itself in her mind. Names and hands. Wax and watermarks, orchard and wall, all quiet for now. Yet the past had stirred, and the present waited for its echo. Chapter 2. Sunday light lay gentle across the vicarage lawn. Bees drifted between late roses, unhurried and content. Miss Marple walked up the path with her small basket and a mind ordered by habit. She had wrapped the diary in fresh muslin as if it were a delicate plant to be carried from shade to shade. Griselda opened the door with a smile bright as porcelain. She wore a green dress that caught the light at the collar. The hall smelled of polish and lemon sponge. Reverend Clement stood nearby with a benevolent expression and flower on one cuff. "You are expected," Griselda said. The sponge behaved like a convert. It rose at once. The Almighty's smiles upon good butter. the vicar said. Miss Marple removed her gloves and set the basket on a side table. She saw the umbrella stand, the queue of hats, and the neat row of church notices on the wall. Each item announced a home at peace with its duties. They moved into the drawing room. The windows admitted the sky in generous rectangles. Griselda poured tea with the grace of a dancer who has learned stillness. Miss Marple took a seat near the hearth and set the wrapped book within reach. "It is an old diary," she said. It came unasked. "It holds a careful hand and a careful conscience." The vicar inclined his head. "Conscience does not improve with age," he said. "It only gains patience." Griselda offered sugar. Miss Marple declined and lifted her cup. The china had that particular wide bowl, shallow and pale. It sang very softly when touched. She felt an old memory stir and settle. "Will you read a passage?" the vicar asked. "A small one," Miss Marple said. She loosened the muslin and opened the diary to a page marked by a faint tea ring. The writing described a harvest dance at Gossington Hall. It noted a quarrel in the lane and the rustle of a dress near the orchard wall. It mentioned mercy with an earnest seriousness that felt almost tender. Griselda leaned closer. "I know that phrasing," she said. "A fondness for capital letters in the middle of things. Flowers, seasons, duty. It belonged to Emily Blount for a time." "Emily was exact," the vicar said. "She could pin a programme to the minute." Miss Marple turned the page and paused. The paper felt slightly thicker at the gutter. A pressed cornflower lay flattened there, pale now but still whole. Its stem had a faint shine along one length. Miss Marple held it near, breathed once and set it down. "A small clue," she said. "This flower was reset after the page was written. The adhesive smells of citrus." "It is not from the time of the entry," Griselda frowned in gentle interest. "Someone tidied memory," she said. The vicar took a careful bite of sponge. Crumbs clung to his sleeve and he brushed them away. He studied the diary as one studies a parish record that might soothe a quarrel. "In that year," he said, "we changed the harvest hymn at the last minute. I remember the new tune tripped us. The choir forgave me in a week." Miss Marple smiled. "The diary notes a hymn change," she said. "It agrees with you." The clock gave a mild chime. Outside, a blackbird scolded a cat with firm conviction. Miss Marple watched the movement of light across the rug. That slow travel measured the hour with more kindness than any bell. They spoke of old dances and modern ovens. They spoke of the way people behave when watched by a portrait. Griselda recalled a gown in blue satin that trailed a little, and a pair of pearls that twitched with every lie. She poured a second cup and passed the plate again. "Who sent it?" the vicar asked. "There was no name," Miss Marple said. "There was kindness in the wrapping. The knot was a neat habit. The wax must be noted." Griselda tipped her head. Her earrings caught a seam of daylight and made one brief star each. "Blue wax," she said. "Emily liked blue wax for letters to town. I once saw a stick of it upon her desk. It had a chip near the end like a missing tooth." Miss Marple folded that sentence into her mind. She regarded the diary and then the tea service. The cups had that wide measure she had felt before. She touched the saucer edge and found a little nick that matched a set at the church hall. "There is another small observation," she said. "This tea service leaves a ring wider than mine. The diary bears such a ring upon the fly-leaf." "It has sat near cups like these," the vicar chuckled. "An indictment of hospitality," he said. "A geography, perhaps," Miss Marple said. The maid brought in a plate of thin sandwiches. The scent of mustard and cress rose sharp and direct. Griselda thanked her with a kind word that carried more warmth than ceremony. The front door opened and closed with caution. Footsteps paused in the hall. Inspector Slack entered with his hat in his hands and a look of mild apology. He greeted them and accepted tea with the caution of a man handling parish china. "I came by on business," he said. "It seems St. Mary Mead has acquired a book that causes interest. It seeks peace more than noise," Miss Marple said. Slack nodded. He ate a sandwich with grave attention. He liked mustard, and he did not pretend otherwise. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and set it beside his cup. "I would ask whether we might see the pages that mention the orchard," he said. Miss Marple opened the diary to the entry about dusk and the rustle of skirts. She held the book for him and did not let it rest on crumbs or saucers. Slack read with that same grave attention. "The orchard wall," he said. "That is the east side. The bricks are old and brittle. They hold the mark of fingers." "The east side," the vicar said, "where the pear tree bends like an old parish clerk." Griselda watched Slack with a kind of tolerant fondness. He looked well in sunlight, which surprised him every time. Another small clue showed itself with the polite craft of a village secret. On the vicar's sideboard sat a jar of sealing wax sticks from church supply. Red sticks lay neat as pencils. One blue stick sat apart, shorter than its fellows, with a little chip near the end like a missing tooth. Miss Marple lifted it and weighed it in her palm. "May I inquire?" she asked. "For weddings and certificates," the vicar said. "Blue is used for special envelopes. We have had it these past 2 months only. Before that we did not keep blue." Miss Marple set it down. The chip's shape matched the memory Griselda had offered. It hinted at a habit that travelled from private desk to parish drawer. It did not accuse. It suggested acquaintance. Slack stood and brushed his hands. "I will arrange to view the orchard," he said. "With care, of course. We shall treat the earth like a witness." Miss Marple nodded. She wrapped the diary again and tied it with neat hands. She asked to borrow the church key to the north gate for the afternoon. The vicar agreed at once. He fetched a ring of keys that chimed softly against his pocket. Griselda walked Miss Marple to the door. The hall remained a portrait of tidy order. The notice board drew Miss Marple's eye again. She stepped closer and studied the pin that held the harvest flyer in place. "A small clue," she said. "There is blue wax on the head of this pin. It has been used to seal something before it was used to pin this paper. Someone here carried a habit from letters to notices." Griselda smiled, half amused and half stirred by caution. "We live by habit," she said. "It is how we manage tea and truth." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped into the garden. The bees kept their industry. The lawn gave back the day like a mirror. She felt the stories settling, grain by grain, into a shape no one had intended, yet many had helped. She took the long way home past the church. The north gate opened with the vicar's key and closed with a soft click. She paused beside the church porch, where a stone stoop showed a shallow groove worn by centuries of feet. There she met Mr. Alan Firth, who called himself an historian. He had come from London with a tidy hat and shoes too new for country lanes. He lifted his hat and smiled in a way that declared urban courtesy. "Miss Marple," he said, "I have heard of your kindness in preserving local colour." "I preserve tea towels," she said. "Local colour preserves itself." He laughed and looked past her toward the churchyard. He spoke of registers and small scandals as if they were trinkets in a shop window. His left hand trembled once and then became still. He asked whether the hall still held the portraits in the east corridor. "It holds what it can," she said. They parted with polite remarks, and he walked away with that careful tread of a man obeying his shoes. Miss Marple watched him take the bend with studied casualness. She thought of London stationers and firm watermarks. She thought of a hand that trembled when lies were near. Rain hung in the air like a thought that had not decided to speak. Miss Marple crossed the lane to the church and looked in at the vestry. The shelves smelled of leather and starch. Parish books sat in a stout row, each one labelled with a year and a duty. Reverend Clement arrived with an umbrella and good temper. He laid out the registers upon the table as if setting bread for visitors. He loved these books with a devotion that resembled patience more than pride. "Here are the harvest accounts for that summer," he said. "You will find names like old friends who have moved away." Miss Marple skimmed with steady eyes. She found lists of pies and raffles and subscriptions. She found anonymous gifts marked with simple words like gratitude or blessing. The sums were small and careful, like pennies placed between folded handkerchiefs. A small clue appeared in the margin of a hymn book kept nearby. A note in tidy hand corrected a line's punctuation to remove a fussy comma. The note read, "Only tidy minds prefer quiet phrasing." The letters formed that capital T in a way Griselda had noticed. It might have been Emily's hand. It might have been another tidy soul who had learned the same school lessons. She set the book down. The vicar watched her face as if he expected kindness to win again. It did. She spoke of the orchard and the box. She asked about staff who might remember. He named Tom Phelps, who dug graves with respectful cheer and knew every root in the parish. They went to the churchyard where Tom was mending a spade with a piece of wire. He greeted them as he greeted the weather. "Do you recall the harvest dance from 30 years ago?" Miss Marple asked. "I recall the roast," Tom said. "I recall a cry near the orchard wall. It might have been a fox. It might have been a person who had not yet decided whether to be brave." Tom's eyes were kind. He did not try to be wise. He offered Miss Marple a pebble shaped like a heart, because some men keep a boy's habit of gift. They thanked him and turned toward the lane. The vicar considered the sky and made an easy joke about umbrellas and Providence. He returned to the vestry. Miss Marple walked to the vicarage kitchen on a gentle errand invented for convenience. She wished to return the key at once. Griselda stood at the kitchen table with a tin of sugar. The sugar tongs lay beside it, engraved with neat initials. Miss Marple lifted them to admire the pattern. The letters were M and R entwined beneath a tiny crown. "A small clue," Miss Marple said. "These initials match the watermark on a card I found with the diary. Morton and Reed of London use this device." "How did these tongs come here?" Griselda smiled. "A wedding present from a cousin in town," she said. "They are older than my marriage by years. I sometimes think they belonged to someone else before they belonged to me." Miss Marple weighed the tongs, then set them down with care. She had no wish to borrow unease. She wished only to place objects where time remembered them. Inspector Slack arrived at the back door with his hat dampened by a doubtful drizzle. He spoke with the maid and then stepped into the kitchen with a nod. He carried a flat parcel wrapped in brown paper. "From the hall," he said, "with permission. It is an old photograph found in a kitchen drawer. It shows a garden party near the orchard wall." They opened the parcel and spread the photograph on the table. Faces stood still in a summer that would not move again. There was Dolly Bantry with mischief in her smile. There was the vicar's old curate with a hairstyle that had never been fashionable. There was Emily Blount near a table with flowers in jars. Miss Marple leaned near and used her magnifying glass. The edges of the photograph showed a slight unevenness. The lower right corner bore a faint smear of blue the size of a fingerprint. "Another small clue," she said. "The photograph sat under blue wax at some time. The smear lies where a seal might have pressed against it, then lifted." Slack grunted with interest. He liked facts when they sat still. He wrapped the photograph again and slid it into its paper. He said the orchard would be visited in the morning. He said Alice Porter had given a statement, brave and trembling. After he left, Miss Marple took out the anonymous note that had come with the evening post. She laid it beside the diary and the muslin. She looked at the 3 words and their cautious spacing. She took up a second envelope that had arrived that morning, a parish circular about hymn practice. The circular smelled faintly of tobacco and starch, like the anonymous note. She walked to the scullery window and lifted the sash. The air brought in damp and the far sound of a cart. She looked at the sill and noted a small black crumb that had fallen from the hinge. It was pipe ash. The vicar preferred a pipe on Wednesdays when he walked to Old Mill Lane. The ash had a different smell from the note. The note's tobacco had a sharper edge like a cheaper blend. Another small clue introduced itself from the simplest act. Griselda poured fresh tea and reached for the lemon. Her left hand steadied the cup while her right cut the slice. The cut was straight and sure. Her left thumb pressed the same place on the cup that had faded the blue dye on Miss Marple's diary. Yet the pressure here left no mark. The porcelain was stronger than cloth. Miss Marple filed the motion among dozens of human habits. She did not suspect Griselda. She saw how repetition leaves prints upon the world. Sometimes those prints match, and sometimes they are cousins only. They carried the tea tray to the drawing room. The room held its calm with courage. Miss Marple sat and spoke of nothing at all for 10 minutes. She asked after the choir's new alto. She asked whether the governess next door had found a puppy for her niece. She let the air grow gentle again. Then Mr. Alan Firth arrived at the vicarage with a polite cough and an apology that showed perfect teeth. He accepted tea and praised the sponge. He asked whether the parish kept programmes for harvest dances. The vicar said it did not keep trifles. Mr. Firth nodded with a sigh that tried to be modest. Miss Marple watched his left hand as he lifted the cup. It trembled again when he asked about Gossington Hall. It steadied when he asked about recipes. He wiped a spot from his cuff with a careful finger. A faint ring marked the edge of his notebook, as if a cup had once sat there while he wrote. The ring was wide, like the vicarage cups. She rose after a pleasant span and thanked Griselda for a grace that made order feel like kindness. She took the diary, wrapped again, and slipped it into her basket. The vicar fetched her parasol from the stand and held the door as if it were his office to approve departures. Outside, the lane shone with a fine rain. Leaves clung to the gravel like coins. Miss Marple walked home at a pace balanced between thought and warmth. The village smelled of wet stone and coal. A child sang a line from a hymn, mostly in tune. At Ivy Cottage, she set the diary upon her work table. She placed the photograph beside it. She folded the anonymous note and slid it into the small drawer. She took out the flake of blue wax and held it close to the smear in the photograph. The colour agreed. The feel of the wax agreed. She replaced it and made a list on a card. Blue wax, present at vicarage and hall. Chip like a missing tooth. Tea rings wider than ivy cups on diary fly leaf. Flower reset with modern adhesive. Morton and Reed device on tongs. Anonymous note smells of cheap tobacco and starch. Mr. Firth tremor in left hand. Orchard wall on east side. Alice saw a tin box. She added one more line. Emily Blount favoured capitals and blue wax. Griselda remembers the chip. Mary came in to ask about supper. Miss Marple looked up with a smile that forgave the day its puzzles. She asked for a plain omelette and a pear. She asked whether Mr. Ellis had brought anything else. Mary said he had brought only a smile and a rumour about a stray terrier at the hall. After supper, Miss Marple wound her clock and drew her curtains. She laid the diary on a clean square of linen and sat beside it with her knitting. The needles made a steady whisper as the rose grew. The whisper did not argue with the rain. The rain approved. A final small clue showed itself before she rose for bed. A faint line of pale dust lay along the diary's top edge, near the backboard. It was not common dust. It had a softness like old plaster. She touched it and tasted a thought. The library at Gossington had plaster cornices that shed a fine powder when brushed by a ladder. The diary had rested near such a place, possibly on a high shelf where a maid dusts less often. She folded the linen over the book and put out the lamp. The cottage held a peace that came not from answers, but from attention. Attention has a temperate heat. It keeps doubt from shivering. In the dark, Miss Marple rehearsed the orchard by memory. She placed the wall, the pear tree, the bend where skirts might rustle. She heard Alice's voice again. She heard the vicar's hymn. She placed blue wax upon a letter and watched it smear a photograph. She saw a box under soil that has forgotten its loyalty to secrets. The rain thinned to a hush. Somewhere, a clock below the hill struck the hour. Miss Marple closed her eyes and let the village settle around her like a well-folded shawl. Morning would lift the latch of the day. The orchard would answer as far as it knew how. Chapter 3. Morning came bright after the rain. St. Mary Mead looked washed and thoughtful. Miss Marple set a saucer for a robin on the sill, then took her seat by the window. She laid out the diary, a clean sheet of paper, and her small magnifying glass. Mary announced Alice Porter with a whisper. Alice stepped in with her hat held like a shield. Her coat was neat but tired at the seams. She stood at the threshold and watched the carpet as if it might move. "Come to the fire, my dear," Miss Marple said. Hands first, then words. Alice obeyed and sat very straight. Steam lifted from her gloves as they warmed. Her eyes were grey and honest, and her mouth trembled when she tried to be firm. "I did not sleep," she said. "I saw the orchard every time I closed my eyes." "The mind revisits what it cannot bear to misplace," Miss Marple said. Alice nodded once and took a breath. "I was 16, she said. "I worked at the hall that summer. I scrubbed the scullery and polished spoons. I learned to go quiet in corridors." Miss Marple poured tea and passed a plate of shortcake. Alice held the cup with both hands like a child who has been cold. She spoke with care, as if each sentence might be checked by a schoolmistress. There was a dance for the harvest, she said. I watched from the door of the still room. Miss Emily liked everything just so. She was exact but not unkind. She liked blue wax and capital letters. Miss Marple folded that confirmation into her private ledger. She let Alice choose her pace. The clock moved without hurry. The robin drank from the saucer and flicked its wings. Late that night, Alice said, I took a tray to the library. Mr. Hargreaves, the butler, had asked for coffee. He liked the house to wake again after a party. He said it reminded rooms of their duties. What did you see? Miss Marple asked. A little light under the library door, Alice said. Voices low and pressed. I did not knock. I waited. Someone opened the door and nearly struck the tray. It was Mr. Hargreaves. He frowned. He took the coffee and told me to go. She stopped and raised the cup again. The tea had cooled, but the holding of it steadied her. I forgot my cloth, she said. I had left it in the hall on the chair near the stair. I turned back after I counted 30. How did you know it was a tin box? Miss Marple asked gently. It rang when Mr. Hargreaves touched it with his boot, Alice said. Not loud. A sound like the inside of a cup. He said, not here. He said, the orchard will keep it. Another breath steadied her. Her hands had stopped trembling. Memory was doing its patient work. They wrapped it in brown paper, she said. Miss Emily sealed the paper with blue wax. She had her stick and a little spoon. She heated the spoon over the lamp and poured a neat circle. She pressed a small seal with a crown. Miss Marple watched the flake of wax on her saucer as if it might answer. She recalled the Morton and Reed mark. She remembered the chip like a missing tooth. And then they carried it out to the orchard, Alice said. I followed at a distance. I went past the still room and through the scullery door. The night smelled of pears and damp brick. They crossed the grass and went to the east wall. She swallowed and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she looked older and braver. I saw Mr. Hargreaves dig, she said, not deep. The ground had been soft from rain. Miss Emily held the lamp. Mr. Firth kept watch toward the lane. What did you do? Miss Marple asked. I froze, Alice said. I thought if I moved, the pears would rattle on their branches. I thought if I breathed hard, the lamp would flicker. They set the box in the earth and covered it. Miss Emily pressed the soil with her shoe and smoothed it with her glove. Then they went back to the house. Miss Marple poured fresh tea. She did not sweeten it. Alice had not asked. She watched the girl find courage in the simple act of lifting a cup and setting it down again. What happened after? Miss Marple asked. The next day, Alice said, Mr. Firth went to London. Mr. Hargreaves spoke sharp to everyone, and then kind, which was worse. Miss Emily wrote letters in the morning room. I kept to the still room and did not look at the orchard. 2 days later, I was sent to collect the linen from the cottage at the gate. I passed the wall and saw a scuff where a shoe had slipped. It was small, a woman's size. She placed both hands flat on her knees and looked at the carpet again. The design made tidy loops along the edge, and the loops steadied her. A small clue came to me later, she said. There was a blue smear on a photograph in the kitchen. It showed the garden party before the dance. The smear sat near the corner, like a thumb had pressed wax there, and then touched the paper. The photograph was put away soon after. Mrs. Judd said it had curled and was no use. Miss Marple inclined her head. You did well to remember, she said. I kept quiet, Alice said. That was my mistake. When I left service, I tried to forget. But Mr. Firth returned this week. He asked questions of the vicar and of Mrs. Judd. He asked about programs and recipes. He does not want the box found. I can feel it. Feeling is sometimes a record of things not yet named, Miss Marple said. Alice's mouth set with determination. I will show you the place, she said. I will go with the police if I must. I am tired of sleeping with my eyes open. You shall not go alone, Miss Marple said. There was a knock. Inspector Slack stood at the door with his hat in his hand. He greeted Alice with courtesy and asked whether the Times suited a visit to the orchard. Alice said it did. Her voice held a steadier line. Miss Marple put on her coat and chose a hat with an honest brim. She took the muslin-wrapped diary and slipped it into her basket. She added a small trowel. She did not say why. They walked through the village where puddles held pieces of the sky. Mr. Ellis wheeled past with a nod. Children dragged sticks along the fence and talked about cakes. The talk of cakes belongs to all ages. At the hall, the east wall looked harmless, as if good manners lived in brick. Slack had already arranged a quiet permission from the distant owners. A constable met them at the gate with a respectful expression. He carried cord and pegs in case distances needed marking. Alice led them to the place near the pear tree. Her feet knew the number of steps without counting. She touched the wall with her fingertips and placed her hand upon the ground. "Here," she said. Slack crouched and looked along the base where moss thickened. He used a thin probe to test the soil. It sank with a softness that soil should not show if left untouched for years. "A small clue," Miss Marple said. "The moss has a change in colour the size of a tin lid. The outer green is older. The inner ring is brighter." Slack nodded and marked the spot with a peg. He dug with a care that belonged in a churchyard. The constable steadied the earth with a small board and kept the spade straight. Alice stood very still and breathed as if she had only just learned how. The spade struck tin with a sound that stopped the afternoon. Slack exchanged a glance with Miss Marple and continued with patience. In a few minutes, a small tin box sat in the light, its paint a tired green, its corners flaked to the metal. The lid bore a strip of brown paper, stained and clinging. The paper carried the ghost of a blue seal, brittle and incomplete. Slack brushed soil away with a soft brush. He lifted the box and set it on the board. "We open it properly," he said, "or there will be a paper seal within if I am any judge." Alice's hands twisted once, then relaxed. She looked taller. They carried the box to the library where the light fell true across the rug. Dust lay on the high shelf and on the frame of a portrait whose eyes had followed many housemaids. Slack laid the box on the table and cut the paper with a thin blade. Inside lay a small ring in a folded handkerchief, a packet of letters tied with blue thread, a photograph, very flat and careful, of two people standing by the orchard wall, and a card with the Morton and Reed device and the tiny crown. Miss Marple peered at the letters without touching. The topmost letter bore the neat, tidy script that loved capital words. It began with "Dear Heart" and then broke off into a firmer hand. Another hand had added a single word in the margin. "No." Slack closed the box and looked to Alice. "You have done a service," he said. "We will make proper statements. There will be kindness in it." Alice nodded and swallowed. She stood very straight, her eyes fixed on the handkerchief for a moment, as if she had mended such cloth many times. A small clue remained upon the table. The blue thread around the letters had darkened on one section, as if held often by a thumb with a stain. The stain had a faint smell, not of tobacco, but of furniture polish. Miss Marple made note and said nothing. They took statements in the little morning room where the light softened the edges of worry. Alice spoke clearly now. She used the words she had practiced in her head for years. When she finished, she looked like a person who has put down a bag carried too long. Inspector Slack carried the box to the station with formal care. Papers would be signed. Seals would be placed again. The law likes its own rituals. Miss Marple and Alice walked back to Ivy Cottage by the longer lane. The village wore a calm face. Calm can be honest. Calm can hide a conversation between houses. "You did well," Miss Marple said. "I was afraid," Alice said, "but fear grew tired of me." They paused by the churchyard gate. Tom Phelps tipped his cap and showed Miss Marple a spade he had mended with a clean line of solder. Miss Marple praised the work and asked after his old dog. Tom said the dog had taught himself to open the scullery door. Some lessons pass without schools. At Ivy Cottage, Miss Marple warmed a bowl of soup and set it with bread and cheese. Alice ate with the shy hunger of a person newly safe. She wiped her mouth with precision and set the napkins square. Habits hold when the world hurries. Mary brought a message on a tray. Mr. Firth had called while they were out. He had left a card with his London address and a polite request to speak about village records. The card felt firm under the fingers. The watermark revealed the Morton and Reed device, bold and certain. "A small clue," Miss Marple said. "He uses their cards without shyness. He wishes us to see. Alice looked troubled.
He likes to be admired, she said.
He liked it then. He likes it now. Miss Marple sent Alice to rest in the small parlour with a book. She wrote a short note to Inspector Slack, mentioning the card and the watermark. She wrapped the note in a page torn from an old exercise book and addressed it in a tidy hand. Mr. Ellis would take it after tea. Then she sat with the diary. She turned to a page near the end where the writing had grown lighter. The entry described a quarrel in the lane and a promise made in anger. The word mercy appeared and then hesitated. The line broke off and resumed with a sentence written days later. Her gaze drifted to the saucer where the blue wax flake waited. She compared its chip to the blue stick at the vicarage in memory. The chip was a twin. Twins can grow apart, yet keep a likeness that disarms. The bell rang. Miss Marple opened the door to Mr. Alan Firth. He was courteous and entirely composed. His hat had a city polish. His shoes were still too new for lanes. His left hand trembled once and stopped. Miss Marple, he said, I regret calling without a set time. Might we speak about parish customs? I am assembling a history. Tea will help history along, she said. He sat and admired the neatness of the room. He praised the lace as if it had joined the clergy. He accepted tea and sugar and declined lemon with an apology to his digestion. I visited the vicarage earlier, he said. I do not retain programs for dances. How careless of posterity. Posterity often thanks the rubbish bin, Miss Marple said. He laughed as if they collaborated in wit. His eyes moved to the basket on the table. He looked and then looked away. He knew the shape of the diary under muslin. I am told you love old paper, he said. I love what people leave in the margins, she said. They cannot help telling the truth there. He nodded with mock solemnity. He lifted his cup and sipped. The cup chimed when it touched the saucer. His left hand steadied the handle a half-second late. What brings you to our orchard? She asked. He did not blink. Orchards belong to all English hearts, he said. I read about them and I find myself walking near them. The habit is harmless. Harmless habits are my favourite kind, she said. His gaze returned to the basket. Her knitting lay upon the muslin. 2 needles crossed like roads on a map. He smiled at the domesticity. It was a mistake to think domestic things are harmless. Did you ever meet Miss Emily Blount? She asked. Only in passing, he said. She had a tidy mind and a liking for stamps and little blue seals. A charming eccentricity. She used capital letters for flowers and seasons, Miss Marple said. So she did, he said. We all have our vanities. She asked about London stationers and special orders. He answered with ease, listing shops as if he had written their histories. He spoke of Morton and Reed with affection. His card lay on her side table, its small crown watching the room. He rose after his second cup. He thanked her for patience and called her conversation refreshing. He placed his hat at a precise angle and went to the door. His hand rested on the latch a moment longer than necessary. If a diary came to you by chance, he said, I hope you will see it finds a proper shelf. Private things deserve shade. Shade keeps some things from withering, she said. It also keeps them from being seen. He smiled and went down the path. His shoes clicked faintly on the stones. Miss Marple watched him reach the lane and turn left toward the vicarage. She closed the door and stood very still. A small clue showed itself at once. On the saucer beside his cup lay a tiny grain of blue wax, fresh and bright. He had touched his pocket and then the saucer. The grain had fallen from his fingers. Habit speaks even when the mouth keeps a polite silence. She folded the muslin from the diary and examined the edges again. A new smudge appeared at the lower corner, faint but present. The oil from a left thumb had pressed there. Mr. Firth had not touched the book openly. He had brushed the corner while praising her lace. Miss Marple wrote a note to Slack and placed the wax grain in a folded paper. She added the observation about the smudge and the tremor. She mentioned the card and the Morton and Reed device once more. She sent Mary to the post office with a firm request. Evening drew close while she wrote. The light turned honeyed at the edges. Alice came from the parlour with a new calm on her face. She looked like a person who had spoken at last and found her voice willing to stay. Inspector Slack will be busy, Miss Marple said. "You have been brave. I was a coward for too long," Alice said. Brave and coward sit in the same chair. They exchange places when the kettle sings. They ate a simple supper. Miss Marple washed the cups while Alice dried. The rhythm pleased them both. The sink filled with little stars of light from the window. After supper, Mrs. Bantry arrived with the sparkle that belongs to incurable curiosity. She brought gossip tied up in kindness. She hugged Alice without asking permission and promised a new dress, which Alice politely refused. "I hear there was treasure in the orchard," Mrs. Bantry said. "Better than coins, letters, rings. The heart likes such treasure best." Miss Marple offered tea and told her only what Slack would approve. She spoke of the box, the letters, and the photograph. She did not speak of the blue grain on the saucer. Mrs. Bantry understood the difference between gossip and harm. When Mrs. Bantry left, the cottage grew quiet again. Miss Marple set the diary on a folded towel and sat with her knitting. The needles measured the pace of thought. The day arranged itself into a pattern that would not tangle if handled with care. A final small clue arrived as the lamp made its little pool. From the street came a faint whistle, 3 notes, then a pause. It was the same whistle the hall gardeners used to call across the orchard. It did not belong to Mr. Firth. It belonged to someone who had learned the hall's languages and kept them. Miss Marple went to the window and saw Mr. Hargreaves's nephew standing by the gate across the road. He carried a parcel under his arm and looked both ways before walking on. She did not follow. She made another note for Slack. The village speaks in sounds before it speaks in words. Old habits travel like songs, night settled. Miss Marple walked through her rooms and straightened the chairs by an inch. She looked at the blue wax flake, the new grain on the saucer, and the smudge on the diary's corner. Together they made a sentence the mouth had not said. She checked the lock, wound the clock, and parted the curtains just enough to let the moon find the muslin. She turned down the lamp and kept a little light in the hall. Safe light is not a boast. It is a courtesy to the dark. Alice slept in the small room off the parlour. Her breathing told of peace returning. Miss Marple listened for a minute and then returned to her chair. She took up the diary and read the last entry again. The words about Mercy sat there, patient and unafraid. She closed the book and placed her hand upon it. The cloth felt cool and certain. The village had given 4 sound clues today, perhaps more. A box in the orchard, blue wax upon wax, a card with a crown, a grain on a saucer, each one part of a pattern that would not stay hidden much longer. She leaned back and let the cottage breathe. Truth travels at human speed. It arrives when the kettle is ready and the chairs remember how to welcome people. It arrives when the brave and the coward change places and call it living. Outside, the air smelled of wet leaves and pears. Somewhere beyond the lane, the rook settled in the lime tree and forgot to be solemn. The night was kind to those who had told the truth. It was patient with those who had not yet learned how. Chapter 4. Morning light reached Gossington Hall with a cool restraint. The avenue of limes held their pale leaves steady. A rook watched the gravel as if counting visitors. Miss Marple walked with Inspector Slack beside the long front steps. The door opened to a maid with careful hands. She led them through a hall that remembered dances. The air smelled of lavender and old coal. The floorboards offered a soft reply to each step. Colonel Blount greeted them with a stiffness earned by years of routine. He wore a tweed coat that had made friends with autumn. His cousin, Miss Emily Blount, stood near a table of roses and looked like a woman already in conversation with herself. "Thank you for receiving us," Inspector Slack said. "Obliged," the Colonel said. "The house has nothing to hide. It has very little to boast of either." Miss Marple's eyes took in the portraits that lined the corridor. Faces watched with calm approval or mild boredom. One face had known laughter once and had forgotten its path back. They moved into the library where the light fell clean across a long rug. The shelves rose in sober lines. A ladder waited near the cornice, as patient as a butler. Dust rested on the top rail like a fine shawl. Miss Emily looked at the rug as if it were accountable. "We have had repairs," she said. "A burst pipe last winter. It spared the books and scalded the carpets." Miss Marple nodded and stepped near the writing table. The wood had the polite sheen given by good wax and steady cloth. She breathed in the faint scent of lavender again. It clung most where hands had rested for years. The orchard, Slack said. We will not disturb it again without cause. The box is in proper care. Miss Emily folded her fingers.
That is a comfort, she said.
Old houses suffer most from rumour. Miss Marple watched her speak, each word balanced on caution and pride. Miss Emily's left thumb pressed the edge of her right glove as if smoothing a crease that would not lie flat. They considered the east corridor. Miss Emily led the way with a measured stride that forgave the echoes. The portraits there wore their finery with practised patience. One portrait held the gaze of the visitor with unusual insistence. Miss Marple paused before it. The eyes had been touched by a later brush. The pupils were a shade too bright. The varnish showed a clear patch new against the older glaze. A small clue, Miss Marple said. This portrait has been altered in recent years. The eyes differ from the painter's hand. Miss Emily's lips pressed together in a brief straight line. It was cleaned, she said. The restorer believed brightness a gift.
I did not argue. Colonel Blount coughed a soft disagreement and then abandoned it.
He preferred peace to precision. They reached a narrow door at the end of the corridor. Miss Emily turned a key and pushed it inward. The door swung on a hinge that invited oil. A short passage led to an old service stair where scuffs made a quiet history. The servant corridor is not in use, she said. We closed it after the staff grew smaller.
Fewer feet make fewer shadows. Miss Marple stepped into the passage and listened.
The house made a low sound there, as if speaking in its sleep. She touched the wall and felt a faint vibration. A current of air passed across her wrist with a chill like spring water. A small clue, she said. There is a draught from behind this panel. The pattern of dust shows a line where the panel has moved in recent months. Inspector Slack examined the skirting. A nail head shone where others had dulled. He looked at Miss Emily. She met the look and did not flinch. The plumber, she said. He found the leak and made a mess. He left the panel untidy. We kept the cost tidy. They climbed to the landing. The west windows gave the garden a spare beauty. Miss Marple measured the orchard wall by memory and by angle. Her gaze returned to the landing with care. A small table stood against the wall with a bowl for keys. The keys lay in modest confusion. One hook above sat empty while others bore a patient shine. A small clue, Miss Marple said. A key once hung here and does not now. The dust ring marks its shape. The absence is recent. Miss Emily looked at the hooks as if surprised by their honesty. Some keys are kept in drawers, she said. Some drawers keep their secrets poorly. They returned to the library. Mr. Alan Firth waited near the hearth with a pose that wished to appear casual. He had been invited by the Colonel to discuss a family list. He greeted Miss Marple with pleased gravity. Miss Marple, he said.
Inspector, how very fortunate. Fortune puts people together who already shared a lane, Miss Marple said. He laughed.
It was a laugh trained by clubs and copied for country ears. He drew a card from his pocket and placed it on the table with a flourish that meant to be modest. I have had news from London, he said. A dealer found a parish programme from the harvest season. It names dances and donors.
I could not resist. Colonel Blount examined the card with caution reserved for rebellious invoices.
Miss Emily watched Mr. Firth's hands. His left hand trembled and then quieted against his cuff. Miss Marple studied the fire grate. The soot showed a faint pattern like a ring touched to the ash. Someone had warmed a sealing spoon there in recent days. The grate held the memory in delicate black lines. A small clue, she said. A spoon for wax was heated here not long ago. The ring of soot rests on fresh ash. Miss Emily looked at the grate with a steady face. We had a clerk come from the agents, she said. Papers were sealed and posted. I keep the old ways where stamps feel too modern. Inspector Slack looked at the poker. A thin smear of blue near the handle caught the light. He said nothing. He looked at Mr. Firth instead. Mr. Firth smiled as if praised for being seen at all. They sat at the long table. Miss Marple trailed a finger along the grain and felt a shallow cut like a memory of a knife. The Colonel offered tea. Miss Emily declined and poured herself water with a controlled hand. Your gardener's whistle carries far, Miss Marple said.
I heard it in the lane yesterday, Colonel Blount nodded. Hargreaves's nephew returned to mend the gate, he said.
He keeps the old signals. It is a comfort and a nuisance. Mr. Firth stood and wandered to the portrait once altered. He tilted his head like a man reading a riddle he had written. He turned back to the table and placed his fingertips on the wood as if claiming a square of territory. "May I ask," Miss Marple said, "who chose the restorer for that portrait?" "I did," Miss Emily said. "A friend in town recommended him. He sent a man with a gentle voice." The man liked varnish, Slack wrote a note. The pencil looked large in his hand. He resisted the urge to press too hard. He had learned that paper breaks when hurried. Miss Marple walked to the far bookcase.
A ledger lay there, bound in brown cloth and well handled.
She opened it and looked at the entries for household purchases. The ink darkened and lightened in a way that revealed 2 pens, 2 tempers, a small clue, she said. The entries for sealing wax change hand mid-month. The earlier hand writes blue as a proper noun. The later hand writes simply wax. Miss Emily's eyelids lowered, then lifted.
"I mislaid my pen," she said.
"Hargreaves kept house while I visited my cousin." His words were plainer. The Colonel shifted in his chair and allowed a slow sigh. He loved practical answers, but disliked their untidy edges. The house clock struck the hour with a note that had lost its brightness. The tone sounded older than the case.
A small echo came from the service corridor.
It arrived a breath late. Miss Marple faced the window and measured the orchard wall again. She saw the bend where skirts rustled 30 years ago. She set that memory beside today's clean rug and today's careful faces. Rain began, light as a whisper. The windows took the sound and softened it. Miss Marple sat again at the table and folded her hands. "I wonder," she said, "if the library lamp might be lit for a moment." Miss Emily obliged. She trimmed the wick and struck the match with a calm economy. The lamp glowed with that old golden patience. Light settled across the desk and found things eager to confess. On the blotter lay the faint outline of a ring. Not a finger ring, but a round stamp pressed lightly and lifted again. The paper had taken the pressure without ink.
Habit had made the mark. "A small clue," Miss Marple said.
"Someone tests a seal upon the blotter before sealing. The circle is the size of the Morton and Reed device." Mr. Firth examined the blotter with pleasant interest.
"Precision is a comfort," he said.
"People who love order cannot endure crooked wax." "I have known them," Miss Marple said. Inspector Slack asked to see the household drawer for keys. Miss Emily hesitated and then nodded. She led them to a writing desk in the morning room. The desk smelled of paper and cedar. The key drawer held a shuffle of brass like old coins. Slack lifted one key with a narrow shaft and a head shaped like a clover. It matched the size of the impression Miss Marple had measured in her mind weeks ago. The cloth of the diary had once kept a key of this size. "A small clue," Miss Marple said. "This pattern fits an impression I noted." The key rested within cloth. It travelled, then returned. Miss Emily watched the key as if it had decided something without consent. "That key opens the cupboard in the east corridor," she said. "It is not an important door. Doors decline importance when closed," Miss Marple said. They returned to the library. The rain gave the room a gentler border. The Colonel lit the fire with a practised hand. Mr. Firth stood near the window and arranged his expression for sympathy. "You have found your box," he said. "Surely the village can rest." "Rest follows truth," Miss Marple said. "Not boxes." Miss Emily sat and folded her hands until the knuckles whitened. She looked at the rug and then at Miss Marple. Her face held the courage of a person who will not run but would prefer to sit. "Mr. Firth came here often that summer," she said. "He was attentive to papers. He admired lists." "People who admire lists admire what they can correct," Mr. Firth smiled. "I admire accuracy," he said. "Accuracy is a kind of care." Miss Marple watched his left hand. It steadied itself on the window frame, as if bracing against a thought. His cuff showed a small blue thread caught at the seam. Threads cling to people who handle packets tied with coloured string. "A small clue," she said. "A thread on your cuff matches the thread around the letters found in the box." Mr. Firth looked down and plucked it away with theatrical mildness. "Coincidences delight the English soul," he said. The Colonel turned a little red and then paled. He did not like the tone that turned facts into parlour tricks. Miss Marple went to the portrait again. She stood close and watched the way the eyes took the light. She saw beneath the varnish a faint original line that had been softened by the later hand. The original gaze had been kinder, less alert. Someone had wished the portrait to look sharper than memory allowed. "A small clue," she said. The retouching sought to add vigilance.
"That is a curious wish." Miss Emily's voice came quiet.
"The man who did it said a house must look as if it were awake," she said.
"I thought that odd."
I let it stand. Slack asked to see the east corridor cupboard. Miss Emily brought the clover key. The cupboard opened to shelves with neat rows of folded linens and a row of labelled tins. The tins had held polish, oil and lampblack. One tin held sealing wax sticks of several colours. The blue sticks were fewer and shorter. Slack lifted a tin and showed the bottom. The inside base bore a circular stain from a sealing spoon. The spoon sat on the next shelf. Its handle was sticky with polish. Furniture polish leaves a film that softens wood and hardens clues. "A small clue," Miss Marple said. "The spoon has traces of polish. The thread around the letters carried the same scent." Miss Emily put a hand to her throat. The gesture was small and very old. It did not seek sympathy. It asked for breath.
"I kept the wax because it was a habit," she said.
"Hargreaves's nephew used the cupboard last week. He returned a mop and did not return the spoon properly."
"I did not scold him."
"He resembles his uncle in shyness." Mr. Firth stepped closer to the cupboard and then checked himself. He placed his hands behind his back like a schoolboy offering obedience. His calm made a sound like a clock that has been wound too tight. They went back to the library. Slack stood by the table and folded his notebook. He had enough on the page to trouble a quiet night. He looked at Miss Marple and invited her with silence. Miss Marple sat and let the room settle. She saw the orchard through rain and remembered Alice by the fire. She saw blue wax in a crown. She saw a card with a London address and precise pride. "I think," she said, "that the diary's author feared pity more than blame." The entries soften names. They praise mercy without asking for it. "The author watched more than she confessed to writing." Miss Emily's gaze held. Mr. Firth's smile wavered and returned. "The box was meant to be found only if unkindness pressed," Miss Marple said. "Someone returned to keep that box from noise."
"That person used blue wax and old habits."
"That person warmed a spoon at this hearth." "That person tested a seal upon the blotter." Mr. Firth's left hand trembled and steadied. "You speak with poetry," he said.
"I prefer lists. The list would begin with you," Miss Marple said.
"But lists deceive when they do not include rooms." "The house has its own authors." Miss Emily rose. She walked to the window and looked at the orchard. Her reflection overlay the glass like a mild ghost. She spoke without turning. "I wrote the diary," she said. "I began it when I was not equal to myself.
"I ended it when I learned how to be kind."
I wrote carefully. I begged my own pardon. Silence has a kind shape when truth stands within it. The Colonel folded his arms and then unfolded them. He looked at his cousin and decided to remain her family. Mr. Firth tilted his head. "You sent the diary to Miss Marple," he said. Miss Emily shook her head. "No," she said. "I kept it until last month. Then I placed it in the cupboard and lost my nerve. Someone took it and sent it to Miss Marple."
"That person believed I would not act," she turned.
Her face wore no drama. It wore fatigue and a stubborn peace. "Hargreaves's nephew," she said. "He has a conscience that worries him. He found the diary when he mended the gate and fetched polish. He sent it away because he trusted Miss Marple to be kind." Inspector Slack looked relieved to have a path that did not break human beings for sport. He nodded once and made a note he would not regret. Mr. Firth cleared his throat.
"And the letters?" he asked.
"What will become of them? They will be read in private and weighed with mercy," Miss Marple said. "They may shame the proud and comfort the honest. They will not be paraded." Mr. Firth smiled without warmth. "That is not history," he said. "It is decency," Miss Marple said. He looked at her and measured his chances against that one word. He found them small. He recovered his charm like a man retrieving a hat from a puddle and pretending it had never fallen. Slack stood. He spoke of statements and times and places. He spoke of courtesy to old houses and patience with old wounds. He spoke to Mr. Firth with a calm firmness that brooked no embroidery. Miss Marple walked once more to the portrait with the sharpened eyes. She lifted her magnifying glass and allowed herself one quiet indulgence. The original painter had left a tiny flaw in the lower lid. The restorer had painted it away. A small clue, she said. We remove flaws that testify to kindness. We prefer a sharper gaze that does not help us, Miss Emily joined her. She regarded the eyes without resentment.
Leave it so, she said.
It will remind me that clarity can be cruel. They returned to the hall. The rook called once and seemed satisfied with the answer. The rain thinned to a suggestion. Miss Marple thanked the Colonel and Miss Emily for their time and steadiness. At the door, the maid handed Miss Marple a small packet. It held a key with a clover head tied with blue thread. Miss Emily had sent it forward with 2 words. For safekeeping, Miss Marple placed it in her basket with a nod. She would keep it until the cupboard needed opening again in gentler company. She stepped onto the gravel and felt the day open like a book to the next page. Inspector Slack walked beside her to the gate. You do not accuse, he said. I arrange, she said. People accuse themselves when they are ready. They paused by the orchard wall. Pear leaves shivered and then grew still. The ground that had yielded a box looked undisturbed again. Earth prefers quiet after confession. On the lane, Mr. Ellis passed with his cap low against the rain. He lifted a hand without stopping. His bicycle bell kept its courtesy. Miss Marple looked back at the windows. A figure stood in the library and then moved away. She could not tell whether it was Miss Emily or a reflection that had grown tired of looking. Houses learn to keep their secrets at a different speed than people do. They walked home by the slow path. The village accepted the rain as one accepts a visitor who always behaves. Miss Marple felt the story shift its weight within her mind. It did not grow heavier. It found a better chair. She set the clover key on her table and wrote a line in her small notebook. Portrait altered.
Panel stirred by draught.
Key absent then offered. Spoon stained with polish. Thread on a cuff. Blotter ring, Mercy confessed. She closed the notebook and folded her hands. The kettle began to sing. The cottage made room for tea and thought. Chapter 5. Rain gave way to a mild grey morning. The air smelled of wet stone and thyme. Miss Marple walked toward St. Mary Mead churchyard with a small umbrella and a thoughtful pace. Reverend Clement waited at the gate with his gentle patience. He carried a ledger wrapped in brown paper. His hat sat a little crooked, as if humility had adjusted it. "Thank you for meeting me," Miss Marple said. "Gravestones prefer company," he said. "They are eloquent when listened to." Tom Phelps stood by the path with a spade and an oilcloth cap. He touched the brim and smiled with plain respect. The church bell gave one soft note, then settled like a bird on a branch. They entered the yard. Lichen traced pale maps on the stones. Names stepped forward and back according to weather and time. Miss Marple paused beside a row of 3, all from the same family. "The diary speaks of a death in June," she said, "yet this stone gives September." The vicar opened the ledger and found a neat entry. The handwriting favoured careful loops and modest flourishes. He read the date aloud. "September, not June. Curious," he said. "Baptisms and burials seldom misremember themselves." Tom rested on his spade. "Weather delayed some services," he said. "But the ground does not wait 3 months without reason." Miss Marple crouched with slow grace. She traced the edge of the stone with a fingertip. The soil against its base carried a faint ridge, newer than the moss on either side. "A small clue," she said. "This stone was lifted and set again in recent years. The ridge shows a newer bed under older growth." The vicar frowned. "Not with anger, but with care. We made repairs to the wall 2 summers ago," he said.
"Yet we did not move this stone." Tom shook his head.
"I recall no work here," he said. "A mason might have done a private favour. Some people prefer new ground under old grief." They walked on. Sparrows held a quick council on a yew and then dispersed. A wreath lay on a nearby grave. Its ribbon faded to the palest blue. Miss Marple studied the bow. The knot had been tied by a left hand guiding a right. The loops were neat but uneven, a telltale compromise. Emily favoured blue. The vicar said quietly. "Many ladies do," Miss Marple said. "But this ribbon speaks of a left thumb that rules." She rose and took a slow breath. The yard carried the scent of wet grass and iron. Tom pointed toward the southern corner where the ground sloped gently. "That patch gathers water in spring," he said. "Roots keep secrets there." They went to the corner. The slope grew softer underfoot. Miss Marple noted a pale scrape on the low stone wall. A wooden wheel had bumped there not long ago, then rolled on. "A small clue," she said. "A barrow or a cart visited recently. The scrape is fresh against old lime wash." Tom knelt and pressed his palm to the soil. He knew the churchyard as bakers know ovens. He lifted his hand and showed a smear of clay lightened by ash. "Lime dust," he said. Someone whitewashed near, then walked through the wet. The vicar looked toward the vestry door. The frame had a new coat, bright and well-intentioned. He made a modest sound of self-reproof. "I see we improved the door and supplied a trail," he said. Miss Marple smiled. She had no wish to scold Paint for being hopeful. She turned toward the path that led to the old yew. A bench waited there, simple and kind. They sat. Tom stood a little apart, as if guarding the quiet. The vicar set the ledger on his knee and opened to the year named in the diary. Chapter: Evening gathered softly over St. Mary Mead. Windows accepted lamps with quiet gratitude. Ivy Cottage trimmed its light to a warm circle on the table. Miss Marple placed the diary on its linen. The second box lay beside it, now empty of its charge. Alice sat near the hearth with the ledger Tom had kept. Inspector Slack arrived with a folder and a face prepared for calm. He set his hat on the chair back and accepted tea. "The kettle approved of honest business. We have the statements," he said. "The record is tidy. The village can breathe," Miss Marple nodded. "Breathing is the beginning of understanding," she said. Alice turned a page in Tom's ledger. Her finger rested on the final line. "The maid knows." She looked up with eyes composed by decision. "I will return the ring tomorrow," she said. "I have written the letter. Kindness travels best wrapped in plain words," Miss Marple said. Slack drew out the folded sheet found in the wall. Emily's hand praised mercy. The second hand entrusted choice to the maid. He read the lines again, not for facts, but for tone. "People have argued over smaller things," he said. "Yet the village wishes to forgive. Forgiveness often wears work clothes," Miss Marple said. They sat in a quiet that held no strain. The cottage kept the hours steady. Through the open window came a faint scent of damp leaves and coal. A small clue offered itself on the diary's flyleaf. A hair-thin scratch ran beside the tea ring. It curved like a question and ended near the binding. The scratch matched a nib that had once paused in worry. Miss Marple touched it lightly. She remembered Emily's careful pen. She remembered a sentence that refused to end until kindness allowed it. Slack finished his tea and rose. "I will visit the mill at dawn," he said. "Then I will close the file." "You will close the file," Miss Marple said. "People will keep speaking more softly." He smiled in that inward way. He took his hat and left the cottage to its patient lamp. Alice folded Tom's ledger and held it to her chest. "He wrote for us," she said. "Each no was a hand between us and harm." "Tom uses words like a gate," Miss Marple said.
"Open enough for air."
"Closed enough for wolves." They prepared for bed. The diary went back to linen. The blue thread lay coiled like a small river. Miss Marple wrote her nightly line. Letter entrusts choice.
Ledger of refusals.
Ring to return.
File to close.
Truth prepared for ordinary days. Morning arrived with a measured glow. The village looked washed and faithful. Miss Marple went to church early and met the vicar in the porch. He carried kindness in both hands. He used it as medicine and as bread. Griselda stood with a basket and the news of a dozen kitchens. "Mr. Firth has taken the early train," the vicar said. He left a note for courtesy. "Courtesies make good umbrellas," Miss Marple said. "They do not change the weather." They walked to the north wall for a last look. Tom was already there with a spade and a tin of seed. He planned repair and green beginnings at once. "The sinking place will settle now," he said. "I have given it roots with manners." Miss Marple thanked him for his ledger of no. He reddened and looked at his boots. The boots respected him by being plain and honest. A small clue revealed itself on the lich-gate post. A smear of furniture polish caught the light like a humble star. It ran in a thin line where a gloved thumb would steady a notice. "Hargreaves's nephew," Tom said. "He polishes what stands still. He likes to be useful. Usefulness is a brave foreign language," Miss Marple said. "He has learned most of the grammar." The bell rang the hour with modest authority. Miss Marple returned to Ivy Cottage by the long lane. Mr. Ellis's bicycle bell gave one cheerful note beside the hedge. On the path, a folded paper waited, tucked under a pebble. It bore Miss Marple's name in careful capitals. She opened it and read 4 words. "The ring is hers." The paper smelled faintly of starch and lilac water. A small clue lingered at the corner. A faint smudge of blue watched the margin like a shy eye. The writer had handled thread or wax before writing, then remembered to be neat. She placed the note with the others. She prepared a small parcel, plain and decent. The ring rested on folded linen, joined by a letter that chose tenderness and proportion. Alice came at 9 with her shawl and her steadiness. They walked to a cottage near the old mill where a widow kept a garden of time and patience. The widow opened the door with a smile that confessed to old sorrow and new peace. "Mrs. Reed," Miss Marple said.
"Alice carries a message entrusted to her." Alice held out the parcel with both hands.
"Something once promised belongs with your family," she said.
"It comes without noise."
"It brings no requirement." Mrs. Reed blinked, then breathed. She untied the string and lifted the ring. She read the letter. Her hand rose to her face and then lowered again. She looked at Alice as one looks at warm weather after an early frost. "Thank you," she said. "It will sit in the box where good memory lives. It will not trouble anyone." Miss Marple watched gratitude find its place. It did not need parade. It asked only a drawer that opened gently. They took tea at the cottage table. A clock ticked, with a sound like kindness counting. Mrs. Reed spoke of her daughter in Bath. She spoke of pears baked slow with cream. Because comfort chooses its recipes, on the way back, Alice walked lighter. She had changed nothing and everything at once. Choice had given shape to quiet. By afternoon, Gossington Hall expected visitors. Mrs. Bantry had organized a small gathering for the sake of good temper. People came with pies and wit, and promised to leave with sense. Colonel Blount greeted them with his slow courtesy. Miss Emily presided from the library with a dignity loosened by humility. She had learned a better chair. The vicar carried the parish tin for donations to the choir's music fund. Griselda brought jars of jam that knew how to improve a spoon. Tom stood near the window, serviceable and patient. Miss Marple took her place beside the portrait, with the sharpened eyes. She found she no longer minded its ambition. It made an honest admission of vanity. Inspector Slack arrived late, clean and at ease. He had visited the mill. He had spoken to Hargreaves's nephew. He had placed a short, final note in his file. "We are done," he said to Miss Marple. "No villains. Only people." "People provide occupation enough," Miss Marple said. He smiled and turned to the room. "A word," he said, "for clarity." The guests quieted with the speed of a parish that knows how to listen. Slack spoke plainly, without ceremony. 30 years ago, he said, a young woman's reputation wobbled under rumour. Emily Blount wrote a diary that recorded fear and mercy. A tin box was hidden with letters that preserved kindness. A second box held the same impulse soberly repeated. Tom Phelps refused harm as often as it appeared. Hargreaves's nephew, trusting Miss Marple, sent the diary at last. Mr. Firth wished to arrange the past for display. He has chosen London for a time. The law finds no crime that needs a charge. The village finds work that needs patience. The room breathed. The house heard itself named with care. Even portraits enjoy decency more than polish. Dolly Bantry clapped once and stopped before it became a habit. "We are sensible again," she said.
"How shocking!" Laughter moved around the carpet's edge.
It reached the table with the pies and improved them. Miss Emily stood and looked at the people she had tried to protect badly and then better. "I am sorry," she said.
I ask no answer.
I would like us to bake more pears. Griselda declared this the best speech the parish had heard in months. The vicar agreed with both hands. Tom nodded as a man nods at a sturdy gate. A small clue appeared while plates were passed. On the library blotter, the faint ring of the seal seemed lighter, as if a thumb had smoothed it without thinking. The mark would remain, but it would trouble no one. Miss Marple walked to the east corridor and paused at the cupboard. She lifted the spoon with the thin black stain near the handle. She washed it with warm water and a kind brush. She dried it on a towel and set it back. She returned to the hall. The rook shouted once from the limes and forgot why. The room smelled of cinnamon and apology. Alice and Mrs. Reed spoke near the window with their heads bent toward one heart. They did not touch the ring. They did not need to. Choice had done the touching. Hargreaves's nephew stood by the door, uncertain of his feet. Miss Marple beckoned him with a smile. He approached like a student called by a gentle teacher. "You kept faith in your way," she said. "You did it clumsily at times." "That is permitted." He looked at the seal in the small evidence bag, now empty of urgency.
I sent the diary because it would not be quiet, he said. I feared noise.
I feared worse, what silence would do. "Next time," Miss Marple said, "you will speak sooner." "The village will not bite a kind hand," he nodded. He took a plate of pie as if receiving instruction. Pie forgives when properly baked. Inspector Slack shared a brief word with Colonel Blount about gates and gardeners. He placed his folder under his arm and looked content to let it gather dust. Miss Marple found Emily near the mantel. Emily studied the portrait without flinching. Her hands lay still on the marble, like two small promises. "I have returned the clover key," Emily said. "The cupboard can keep linens again. It will look very proud of them," Miss Marple said. "Will the diary live at the hall?" Emily asked. "Perhaps for a while," Miss Marple said. Then at the vicarage, folded away.
Then with Alice, if she asks.
"Stories do not like single homes," Emily smiled with the pale brightness of a person learning a kinder grammar.
"I shall not write capitals for flowers and seasons now," she said. "I will keep—"
Griselda pressed a plate into Miss Marple's hand and declared that the lemon sponge had achieved sainthood. Dolly Bantry announced a jumble for hats with lives left in them. The vicar blessingly miscounted the coins and laughed at himself. A small clue completed the circle just before dusk. On the scullery shelf stood the bottle of furniture polish with the tiny crown. Its cork had been pushed in half a turn, then settled flat. A fussy habit had learned to relax. The party thinned to sensible goodbyes. The hall kept their echoed steps and then wiped them gently away. Slack tipped his hat and went to his paperwork with a secret relief. Tom locked the orchard gate with a respectful click. Miss Marple walked home by the lane that knows her shoes. Mr. Ellis's bell sounded like a promise that had learned discretion. The air cooled with the grace of September owning its evening. At Ivy Cottage, she lit her lamp and set the diary before her. She took up her pen for a last entry in her own small notebook. Orchard at peace. Letters with their proper guardian. Ring returned with kindness. Mr. Firth gone to London. Emily admits authorship and steadiness. Tom's ledger known and thanked. Nephew forgiven his Polish. Village returned to tea and proportion. She looked at the diary's first page. 30 years had thinned its ink, but not its intention. Between the lines lived the person who had written for mercy. Between the lines had moved a maid who had chosen well. Between the lines had walked a village that learned to prefer quiet truth to tidy scandal. She closed the diary and laid her hand upon it. The room accepted the gesture as a benediction. Outside, the rook remembered solemnity and then laughed at itself in the leaves. Alice knocked and stepped inside with a small bouquet of cornflowers. She placed them in a jar without ceremony. Their blues sat modestly on the table, neither emblem nor exhibit. "For the window," she said. "The colour looks honest there." "It does," Miss Marple said. They sat in companionable silence. The clock made its thoughtful sound. The kettle warned that it had opinions, and then behaved. "Do you think the past is quiet now?" Alice asked. "It has learned to sit," Miss Marple said. "It will not beg for attention." It will accept the biscuit if offered. Alice laughed softly and stood. She thanked Miss Marple for 1,000 small lessons and for tea that never scolded. She went down the path with a step that trusted the ground. Miss Marple cleared the cups and folded the linen under the diary. She drew the curtains to a sensible width. She let a narrow band of night remain, because night has its claims upon stories. She sat with her knitting and worked 2 rows. The needles kept the rhythm of the village. They were neither hurried nor dull. When the clock chimed, she rose and placed the diary in its drawer. She locked it, not as a fortress, but as a courtesy. She set the key in its dish and turned down the lamp. The cottage exhaled and welcomed sleep. The lane settled. The limes whispered a little and then were still. Peace did not pretend to perfection. It allowed a few untidy edges. It allowed people to be people. Miss Marple stood a moment longer and let the day pass through her gently. She had not solved a crime for triumph. She had arranged a mercy for use. That was enough. And so, dear listener, the diary that Miss Marple was never meant to read draws to its quiet close. The candle's flame is steady once more, its light falling softly on truth revealed. In St. Mary Mead, peace returns, and Miss Marple's knitting resumes, each stitch a reflection on the tangled hearts of humankind.
Until next time, dear listener, another secret fades by candlelight.